it does not have a clear-cut distinction between people of the deen and the masses. The only distinctions that are made are on the basis of belief. The believer is not the same as the unbeliever. On the basis of taqwa, the greater a person's taqwa, the more honor Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala confers upon him. On the basis of knowledge, those who know are not the same as those who do not know, and the greater a person's knowledge, the higher his rank with Allah. And finally, on the basis of contracts, through contracts, the upper hand is better than the lower hand, and the leader is owed your obedience because of your pledge to him. These are the ways that our distinctions are made in this great deen of ours. But we do not have a priesthood. We do not have monks and nuns, brahmins, rabbis, etc., etc. The first of these, belief, simply means that Muslims are afforded more rights than non-Muslims. They are at the top of the hierarchy in any healthy society. The second, taqwa, has no bearing on a person's position in society, as it is purely between him and Allah. As for the third, knowledge, there is no doubt that knowledge is a means to achieve status in this world as well as the next. For it is only with knowledge that any society can hope to thrive and can hope to survive. But knowledge is not what it has become in this world of ours today. The doorway to knowledge should be open to everyone. You do not become part of a club or a special stratum of society by achieving some arbitrary minimum level of knowledge or by completing some specified course. The university graduate may in fact have less knowledge than the one who has studied in his village and sat at the feet of his local teachers. The true extent of a person's knowledge is difficult to determine or measure, and so to raise one person above another on its basis is no easy thing. The problem that we have today is that all too often it is those scholars themselves who seek to raise themselves up and who put themselves forward, whether through proclaiming their grasp of knowledge publicly or choosing to don a garb that differentiates them from the common folk, putting on clothes that show them to be different from the common folk. We have come to know our ulama by their appearance, by their flowing robes, their luxuriant beards, and their Azhari turbans. It is those symbols that we look for, and those symbols that we have come to trust. But in truth, those symbols do little more than create a barrier between us and them, and create a de facto priesthood in a deen that has never had a priesthood. And that priesthood increasingly comes to see knowledge as their domain and their purview, and starts to look down upon the masses as ignorant. They close ranks and become isolated, and the more they do that, the less benefit they bring the people. Anything, and I repeat, anything that takes knowledge away from the main body of the Muslims and makes it the plaything of the few is to be avoided. Ulama should not take any steps, even if it is just wearing different clothes, if it takes them away from the people and causes them to become less accessible. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ did not dress any differently to his companions. Indeed, when a stranger entered the mosque of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, he was obliged to ask those he saw, "Which of you is Muhammad? Which of you is Muhammad?" ﷺ. Because there were no outward signs differentiating the Messenger ﷺ from his companions. And it was a rule among the ulama of the great madhab of Imam Malik that they dress in the customary garb of their land and not differentiate themselves by their clothing from the people of that locale. To do so, they concluded, was to set themselves apart from the people and was therefore reprehensible and blameworthy. For Ibn Umar narrated that the becomes well known among the people on account of its being different in color or type from their clothing, thereby drawing the gazes of people to them. When the famous Maliki scholar Al-Harith ibn Miskin rahimahullah was appointed Qadi of Egypt in 237 Hijri and was instructed to wear the black robes of state by the Khalifa Al-Mutawakkil, he refused to do so, not wanting to wear something that set him apart from the people, even though the Khalifa threatened him with the dislocation of his hips and with flogging if he did not obey. He did not want to make it seem that the people of knowledge were a different category of people to the rest of mankind. He recognized the inherent danger in such a step, and that danger is that people start to associate the clothes with the office, and so cease to look beyond the clothes, automatically trusting whoever is wearing those clothes without knowing anything more about them, and whether they actually possess any knowledge or not. The outward symbols of knowledge become more important than the knowledge itself. And when that clothing represents an entire institution, such as the Azhari cap, then it removes personal responsibility and corporatizes knowledge, and makes the issuing of fatwas no longer the heavy burden on a scholar's shoulder that it once was, forcing him to examine the issue thoroughly and from all directions, but something much easier, given that it is not his name primarily associated with the fatwa, but the name of the institution that he represents. So instead of hearing of such and such a fatwa from such and such a scholar, we now all too often hear of fatwas issued by the Azhar, or by the MJC, or by the Muslim Council of Britain, or this institution, or that institution, much as we used to hear in the past in Europe of edicts issued by the Church. A very similar state of affairs. This issue of clothing is not one that is limited to the ulama, but has become a symptom of many of our Muslim men and women who feel obliged to wear what has come to be termed as Islamic garb, Islamic clothing, and feel that doing so is somehow incumbent upon them. And so you see young Muslim men walking through the streets of London wearing a thobe and a white cap, and young Muslim women wearing the black niqab, thereby drawing the gaze and the attention of every passerby towards them. They set themselves apart from the societies in which they live and say, by their appearance, to those around them, look at me, I am Muslim. They segregate themselves and cause the peoples of those lands to view Islam as something foreign and alien. This was not the example of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or the example of his noble companions. He did not discard the clothing of the people of Mecca and create his own clothing style. He did not tell people, when they became Muslim, that they had to change their clothes and don a particular uniform. The only way that the clothing of his community differed from the clothing of the people around them was that they were more careful to maintain their modesty and avoid arrogance in their clothing. For an example of this, let us look at the famous hadith always quoted to us by those young men who like to talk a lot about bid'ah. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma narrates that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, "Man jarra thawbahu khuyala lam yanzur Allahu ilayhi yawm al-qiyamah." Whoever lets his clothes drag on the floor through arrogance, through haughtiness, Allah will not look at him on the day of Qiyamah. This is always understood by these people to mean that it is categorically forbidden in the deen for a man to wear any garment that extends beyond his ankles. But the length of the garment is not the point of the hadith. The arrogance, the haughtiness that is mentioned is. It is forbidden when it is done deliberately to show off to other people and to broadcast a message that you can afford to ruin your clothes in that way because you are so wealthy you can simply discard those clothes and put on another garment. This is proven by the continuation of the فقال أبو بكر رضي الله عنه إن أحد شقي إزاري يستصرخي إلا أن أتعاهد ذلك منه. فقال إنك لست ممن يفعل ذلك خيلاء. Abu Bakr said, one of the 2 edges of my izar sometimes drags along the ground without my noticing. He continues to do so until I notice it. So the Prophet ﷺ said, but you, Abu Bakr, are not one of those who does that out of arrogance. The rule regarding how clothing was to be worn was simply to avoid arrogance, to avoid showing off. Similarly, the rule regarding hijab is simply to maintain modesty and ensure that the full awrah, the full private area of a person is covered. It does not require a person to wear a particular shape of headscarf or a particular color. Similarly, clothing should avoid attracting undue attention, because then you are encouraging others to wrong action. You are encouraging others to then turn their gaze upon you. And especially if they are one of the opposite sex, that means you are encouraging them to do something which they should be avoiding. So whatever clothing has that opposite effect should be avoided on that basis. And there is no doubt that overtly so-called Islamic garb has that effect and attracts the gaze of both men and women when it is worn in the cities of Europe and many other places in the world. It causes fitna. It arouses feelings of anger and resentment in the local non-Muslim population. It is antagonistic. You wouldn't walk with your wallet and your mobile phone out in your hands and in full view of everyone when you were in a dangerous area of town. So why do that with your clothes? It creates an us and them mentality that only brings harm on the Muslim community and no benefit. So we must avoid that and avoid differentiating ourselves on such a basis from those in the societies in which we live. We want to attract them to Allah, not to repel them from His deen. We differentiate ourselves only by our character and our adherence to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not some meaningless symbology. So don the libas and taqwa. Clothe yourselves in the clothes of fearful awareness of Him. Clothe yourselves in belief of Allah and His Messenger and adherence to His commands and prohibitions. That is the clothing that will be of benefit to you in this world and the next. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه والتابعين والتابعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد فيا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله ما استطعتم واسمعوا وأطيعوا وأنفقوا خيرا لأنفسكم. يا عباد الله أوصيكم وإياي اتقوا الله وطاعته وأحذركم وإياي عن معصيته ومخالفته. Can I ask people to move forward, please, and make some space at the back for those who are standing outside? Those of you by the door, can you please make some space so people can come in? The other great outward symbol of religiosity is the beard. Often, the longer the beard, the more religious a man is seen to be, and woe betide any man who does not have one. They are considered to be beyond the pale, such men. Sometimes, people attach such importance to the beard that their entire first judgment as to the worth of a man is determined by the length of his beard. All other considerations, good character, noble bearing, etc., are thrown by the wayside. An example of this happened in this very mosque a couple of years ago, when the Imam came into the mosque before the customary time for the Iqamah. to find someone had taken his place as Imam and already completed the prayer. So he approached this man to ask him by what right he had taken the prayer. And the man, who happened to have a very long beard and be wearing a thobe, said that he had received permission from one of the attendees. And anyway, the Imam was not fit to be Imam because his beard was not long enough. Then he turned to one of the congregation and said, "Who looks more like an Imam, me or him?" This might be amusing if it were not so commonplace. This mindset that gives priority to symbol over substance, that focuses on the superficial and ignores the true core of the deen. It is little wonder that the mu'amalat, the transactions of the deen, have been left by the wayside and zakat has been abandoned as a pillar when our focus and energy is focused and devoted to such non-issues. But the truth of the matter is that the presence of the beard and the length of the beard is not as important as has been made out. It is more a question of urf, of custom, than anything else. Its purpose was to differentiate Muslim men from Persian fire worshippers, Magians, who all wore their facial hair in one particular way, and to differentiate men from women. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, "Jazzu shawarib wa arful liha wa khaliqul majus." Trim your mustache and let your beard grow, so that you are different to the Magians, the fire worshippers. And he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, لعن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم المتشبهين من الرجال بالنساء والمتشبهات من النساء بالرجال. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam cursed men who make themselves look like women and women who make themselves look like men. Let men be men and women be women, not a confusing mix of both. The beard was the best way to achieve this, for women can, generally speaking, not grow them. As for length, the best length was determined by what was seen as the norm in that society for a well-groomed man. As the norm in the society for a well-groomed man. While the Prophet ﷺ was sitting in the mosque, a man came in with wildly disheveled hair and an unkempt beard. So the Messenger of Allah ﷺ commanded him to leave and to tidy up. And when he came back, looking well-groomed, having brushed his hair and shaped his beard, the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, أَلَيْسَ هَذَا خَيْرًا مِنْ أَنْ يَأْتِيَ أَحَدُكُمْ ثَائِرُ الرَّأْسِ كَأَنَّهُ الشَّيْطَانِ? Is this not better than one of you coming with his head disheveled? In other words, the hair on his head disheveled, looking like shaitan. On this basis, the ulama of the madhab of Imam Malik rahimahullah preferred shorter, well-groomed beards to longer ones that looked untidy. The important thing is to look well and not repel others by your appearance. And it is nothing to do with the degree of your taqwa, the length of your beard. It is not your clothes and beard that you will be questioned about when you go before your Lord, but rather your heart and your actions. As the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَنْظُرُ إِلَىٰ أَجْسَامِكُمْ وَلَا إِلَىٰ صُوَرِكُمْ وَلَكِنْ يَنْظُرُ إِلَىٰ قُلُوبِكُمْ وَأَعْمَالِكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not look at your bodies nor your outward forms, but rather looks at your hearts and your actions. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people of substance and not people of superficiality. إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَمَلَائِكَتَهُ يُصَلُّونَ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا صَلُّوا عَلَيْهِ وَسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. وارض اللهم عن الخلفاء الراشدين أبي بكر وعمر وعثمان وعلي، وعن أم المؤمنين عائشة رضي الله عنها التي أمرنا الله في سورة النور أن ندافع الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين واخذل الكفر والكافرين وانصر المجاهدين في سبيلك واجعل كلمتك هي العليا وكلمة الكفر هي السفلى. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء